As we continue our coverage of the UAW strike, which has now hit 6 weeks, it really has changed the power of labor. And you see negotiations that are happening across all sectors of business in this last 6 to 8 months. And it really could set the tone about how future negotiations go and what unions can ask for and what companies can deliver. Joining me now is Merrick Masters, professor of business at Wayne State University. And Merrick, I couldn't think of anyone better to kind of bookend where we've been here in the last 6 weeks than you joining us and talking a little bit about what we have seen over the last 6 weeks and I guess the class that you're probably going to end up teaching about what we've seen here with the UAW negotiations.
Well, I think we've seen, as you suggested, a dramatic shift in the balance of power between labor and business. The UAW has taken advantage and successfully exploited a situation which is favorable to unions. It has evidently negotiated what I would call a record contract with Ford, and it's using it as a basis for a pattern in the industry. This will set a tone which will be replicated in other parts of the U.S. economy in those sectors that are unionized, and also will affect the non-union sector because many of these companies, particularly in the auto industry that are non-union, will be watching what happens at the UAW negotiations and raising their wages, if for no other reason than to prevent unions from knocking at the door.
When I think about this also, Merrick, I think about the conversations that, because we've been able to see the details during the negotiations, the conversations that people are having about what a fair wage actually is and what the middle class in our country looks like if you are a union worker. And when you see some of the details coming out of the tentative contract with Ford, and you look at 5 weeks vacation, if you invest in the 401k for 30 years, you could have $1 million, top wages of $100,000. What kind of conversations does this mean to you when we think about what the middle class is here in this country and what people can achieve?
Well, I think this is a struggle for the survival of the middle class, the revival of the middle class, if you will. And for decades, we've seen stagnating wages. We've seen workers forfeit benefits that they've had before, such as defined benefit plans and retiree health care. And this is an effort to provide for additional, not only job security, but economic security for active workers and retirees.
How quickly do you think now, Merrick, GM and Stellantis are going to come to an agreement with the UAW? Does this really accelerate what they need to do, knowing that Ford has already workers back at work?
Yes, I think it does. It creates a strong incentive for them to get things done. There is some hard bargaining, obviously, that will have to take place, but around-the-clock bargaining is apparently taking place at GM. And that suggests to me that they are on the cusp of an agreement. And I wouldn't be surprised if Stellantis follows suit fairly soon. I would be amazed if the UAW didn't insist on a pattern, and the companies recognize this, that they're not going to get out of a strike without conceding to more or less a pattern. And so therefore, things should fall into place in relatively quick order.
So when we look at the tactics that Shawn Fain has taken, what do you think is going to be written about this?
Well, I think it's going to be a new chapter in the history of the UAW and the labor movement that talks about the revitalization, perhaps, of unions and the rebalance of power between labor and capital in society. But a lot remains yet to unfold before this story can be completely told. And that depends a lot on what happens to the companies. And I actually believe that the companies are in a transitional period and will cease to be basically car companies and be more like technology and mobility companies going forward. And that has implications for how they're structured and how they partner with other businesses.
And I think that was my next question for you, Merrick, is when we look at the ability for GM, Ford, and Stellantis to be able to grow after now having to spend so much money on labor coming out of this contract and the change that they're going through with EVs, and even seeing some of the companies starting to pull back a little bit on production of EVs because of the demand is down. What do you think that we should be looking for when we're watching the auto companies in the next several years or so in terms of their profitability?
I think that it's going to be a struggle. The transition to electrical vehicles, as we've seen recently, is going to be difficult for all companies. 70% of the market is in China. The natural resources are not in the US. These companies will face challenges navigating through this transition, and they'll have to adapt accordingly. And I think that it inevitably means they'll have to be more global, they'll have to be more technological, and they'll have to have different products that appeal to a more diverse array of customers.
Merrick Masters, Wayne State University professor of business, thanks so much for joining me. It's good to talk to you and appreciate the perspective. Have a great weekend, okay?
Thank you for having me. Appreciate it. Take care.
Okay.